I'm going to move over to the to some slides just to work through with you the issues of decision-making biases. And this is a deep dive into a course that I have here. If you see right here, I have a course called The Six Biases of Decision Making. It's a nice little course that does a great job. And I'm going to summarize that here and give you some insight about what that is all about. I'm going to cover these six: the base rate, the availability bias, confirmation bias, the good old favorite. But I also want to get into some that are lesser known, like the hindsight bias. Overconfidence is fairly well known, but also sunk cost bias. And if you stay to the end, guess what? I'm going to have I'm going to have a little bonus content as well, and stay in for that, because this seventh bonus bias is one that is not very well known, but boy, is it a killer. And so I really want you to get the hang of that as well. This so-called seventh bias, and for some reason it's not coming up on my screen here. So let's go ahead and get into the base rate bias. This is the first one that I want to cover. And this one is probably one of the more difficult to understand, simply because there's some mathematical thinking involved in the base rate bias. And let me describe what it is, and then I'll give you some examples. Base rate bias means this: when you're suffering from the base rate error, what that means is you are taking a piece of information, like a statistic, something that's been quoted to you perhaps, or something you read, and you're not looking at the whole picture to understand what I call the underlying rates. You're not looking at the base rate. You're looking at the event, but not the base rate that's underlying the series. And so let me give you an example, probably the easiest. Let's assume that somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, did you know that 90% of car accidents happen within 25 miles of our house?" And you think to yourself, "My God, 90% of car accidents happen within 25 miles of our house?" And so if you're like most people, you'd immediately conclude that, holy smokes, it must not be very safe near where I live. But the picture changes when you consider the base rate. And the base rate goes like this. The base rate says, if you spend 90% of your time within 25 miles of your house, then that is a very normal statistic. There's nothing unusual about that. If you spend 95% of your time within 25 miles of your house, then you're actually safer. Your rate of accidents is actually lower than your base rate of being in that area. Let me give you another example, kind of an example that I talk about in the course a little bit. Let's assume you hear somebody says to you, that iPhones and smartphones, people break their smartphones 30% of the time in the kitchen. And so you hear that statistic sort of naked by itself, and you think, oh my God, the kitchen, it must be really dangerous for smartphones. Something must happen in kitchens. But then when you consider, if you consider the base rate, and you look and let's say you spend 40% of your time at home in the kitchen, then a 30% rate of iPhone accidents is low. It's actually safer in the kitchen. But if you only spend 20% of your time in the kitchen and 30% of the accidents happen there, then you could then conclude that in fact you have a higher rate of accidents in the kitchen than the base rate. So my advice to you is simply this: when somebody quotes you a statistic, especially in the media, God love them, the journalists, a lot of them are statistically trained properly. A lot of us aren't statistically trained properly. Whenever you hear a statistic, just remember this question. And the question is simply, compared to what, right? Compared to what? If you ask yourself this question in most situations, it's going to help you overcome base rate bias. So if somebody says, something about COVID or some other event going out there, just stop and say, well, compared to what? How does that compare to the total population, for example? That's the base rate bias. Let's go to confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is one that's pretty well known. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this one. And this is just our normal tendency to go out and get information that confirms our views, and we downplay information that disconfirms our views. We like to hear things, we like the echo chamber, so to speak. We like to hear things that are consistent with our views. Well, that's fine, except when you don't avail yourself of all the evidence, the pros and cons of your situation, you're gonna make less optimal decisions. You're going to succumb to this, and it's not good. And so, confirmation bias. Here's what happens. You have a great idea, you tell it to your colleague or your boss, and your boss says, "Well, I'm not sure if there's enough evidence to support this." And you say, okay, well, I'll go out and get evidence to support it. And what do? You go out and get evidence to support it, but you ignore the evidence that goes against your proposal. And that's going to get you in trouble. So here again, what I like to do is always, just look at pros and the cons of your situation. It may sound simple, and it is, but have a natural inclination to find evidence that disconfirms your views. I'm telling you, I learned this later in life, and I wish I had learned it earlier, type of thing, because if you go out and find evidence that disconfirms, if you find all the evidence that goes against you, and you find that it's not very strong, well, now you have a really good argument. I mean, think about it. You can't sell the pros in a way that are going to overcome the cons, the weaknesses of your argument. Go out and get the weaknesses too, so everybody can see them in context and in balance. The good old confirmation bias. And here's another one. This one gets me. It's the availability bias. Now, the availability bias, very simply, is this idea that we tend to prefer information that is most recently available, the recency bias or availability bias. If we can remember it, then it must be true. And guess what? That is false, right? You're gonna run into trouble, and we just succumb to this all the time. We can reach back and grab information because it's in our memory, it's available to us, and we bring it into our consideration set, and we use it because it's there. What we see is all there is, and let's go ahead and base this. And I'll give you an example. Last night, my wife and I were watching the news, and we saw a story about an unfortunate plane accident. A small plane crashed on a small island in Lake Michigan that we've been to, actually, called Beaver Island. We went up there to visit our good friends Chris and Linda Allen, former professor emeriti at UC, and that was years ago. But when my wife saw this plane crash, she looked right at me. She said, "Well, I don't want to take those little planes anymore to Beaver Island." And I looked at her and I said, "Well, why?" She says, "Well, look what happened." And I promised her I wouldn't mention her in this live stream, but I guess so much for promises, right? And my point is, she and all of us, me included, she succumbed to the availability bias. It was recent, it was available, and she's made a sweeping conclusion about her preferences now without looking at all the other evidence about the safety record. And this is especially true with vivid, it's sometimes called the vividness bias. Vivid events really stick in our memory. And we're seeing this with COVID. Here again, COVID is dominated, our thinking because it's so vivid, so available. It's on the news all the time, and it's hard to buy. So how do you defeat it? Well, it's a tough one. You here again, you have to say, compared to what? How does that compare to the total existence of all the other data? What else is missing from the equation? The availability bias. Now, here's one of my favorites. And we all succumb to what's called the hindsight bias. Basically, the hindsight bias is you look in past events and you essentially recalculate the odds. So you let's say for example, The Bengals, the Cincinnati Bengals, are going to the Super Bowl. They beat Kansas City, and it was an upset. And so, what happens in a probabilistic event like sports or anything in life, when it happens, we look back and say, "Well, I knew it all along. I knew they were going to win all along." Well, that's not true. The odds were uh, Kansas City was a 7-point favorite, and that didn't change because of what happened. The odds don't change. It's just your understanding of the odds. And when you revise your probabilities in hindsight, it can lead you to errors. Let me give you an example, like a work example. Let's say you go to your boss and say, "Hey, I have an idea. I want to do this proposal. It's worked. I've estimated the data shows it works about 40% of the time." And your boss is like, "I don't think so." But you try it anyway. You try the idea, and sure enough, it works. And you think, "Oh, well, this is great." And then you do it again, but then it doesn't work. And then you do it again, and what do you know? It doesn't work. And you keep trying this thing. And in hindsight, you look back and go, "Oh my God, it only works about 40% of the time." And so it was exactly what the probability was going into it, but you thought it was going to be higher because it worked that one time. Don't revise your probabilities looking backwards. Don't go back and say, "I knew it all along." The odds have not changed. It's just that you fell on one side of the equation or the other, the good old hindsight bias. And then, everybody's favorite, the overconfidence bias. Overconfidence is something we all succumb to. You have to guard against this one. This is feeling like we're more confident about the outcome of something than we should be, or we're more confident in our abilities to accomplish something than we should be. We're overconfident, and it's a chronic problem with humans. We do this all the time. And so, what I find, looking back on a long career in industry and academia, it's a it's a real problem if you can't get this one in check. And I find that the people that are very successful in life are the ones that they don't trust their judgment. They just always put their judgment to the test and are willing to consider other evidence all the time to overcome this one, overconfidence. And it's especially true if you have a particular expertise in something. Let's say you are a neurosurgeon, and you're a very accomplished neurosurgeon, and what happens with expertise is that you sometimes will transfer that expertise into other domains that you know nothing about. You're overconfident, and it's not just neurosurgeons. I'm not beating up on them. It's anybody that has an expertise in one thing will transfer that confidence they have in one domain over to another. That's just not warranted. You're going to get in big trouble if you do that. So I'm going to check over here for questions, and I know Darla Wilkinson, Darla, is also checking for me. And if you have questions, be sure to put them in the chat. We'll save some time here. If you have a question, sometimes it helps if you put the letter Q : before it, so we can keep track of what you want me to talk about. Okay, so Darla, any questions? Put them in Slack or put them. I'll check them here too on my monitor. No questions yet. Good. Okay, so let's go ahead and cover the last but one before I get to the bonus content, so to speak. Good old sunk cost bias. This one really can get you in trouble, and it's very common. What the sunk cost bias is that when making a decision, you consider monies or resources that have already been spent as part of your decision. And the sad truth is, once you have sunk money into something, it is just that, sunk, and therefore irrelevant. And so, classic example, you put a lot of money into an addition of your house, and it's not done yet. And what happens with with this is that we get into a situation now where we need to spend more money, and we say, oh, well, we spent all this other money. We might as well spend this money. No, you should look at each decision as fresh and not consider the investments you've already made, because you can't change those. And so this is not throwing good money after bad money. It's throwing good money after irrelevant money. And sunk cost it's hard. It's hard to ignore this. And you have to look at each decision fresh, as though you were just considering it for the first time without prior spending on the situation. So those are the 6 killer decision-making biases that always emerge as sort of the top ones. And boy, there are a lot longer list than this. Some people have talked about in the comments here, can I talk about attribution bias? If I think I understand that right, I'll talk about that in just a minute. And if you have more questions about this, boy, there's some great resources here on LinkedIn Learning, especially with a guy named Dan Ariely. I bet some of you have listened to Dan's. He had a live broadcast recently. I love Dan. Dan is just an amazing brain. He's got a great book out there called Predictably Irrational. And Dan is a friend of ours. He was our first endorser of our book on creativity called Innovation Inside the Box. So Dan is a behavioral economist. I'm sure he's going to win a Nobel Prize one day. Keep your eye on Dan Ariely. He's just an interesting guy to listen to. So he's done a lot of work, and colleagues like him have written a lot about decision-making biases. You can learn a lot about them. So I've talked about just sort of the 6 ones that just seem to emerge over and over as a professional in my work environment. Let me talk about the bonus content, though. Good old, this thing called omission neglect. Have you ever heard of it? Probably not. And therein lies one of the problems with omission neglect. Here's what this nasty little bias is all about. And somebody asked the question, can I define bias? Yeah, that's it's kind of a common term today, more in a pejorative sense. But a bias is just an inclination, a leaning. We have a bias to being right-handed or left-handed. It's an orientation or a predisposition, a bias, a preference. So that's what it is, and what it does in the sense of decision-making biases, we also call these heuristics. You'll hear that term also. Heuristics meaning rules of thumb. We use rules of thumb, and those rules of thumb are just shortcuts and they can lead to bad decisions. So you have to be careful. Whatever your definition of bias, in this context, that's what it means. You just have a predisposition to something. So let me talk about omission neglect. This is one that has been worked on a great deal by one of my colleagues here at the University of Cincinnati, Frank Curtis. Frank is the one who has recognized this condition. It's been around a long time, but omission neglect means this, that we tend to ignore information that is not there, but is still relevant to our decision. And it kind of goes back to this idea, what you see is all there is, and that's just not true. Most times when you are dealing with an issue, you have some sort of information that you probably could use and aren't considering. You neglect that data that is missing but very relevant. Now that sounds a little abstract, but let me see if I can give you some examples of this. The people that are good at overcoming this one are like crime scene investigators or aircraft accident investigators. The detective walks in. Let's do an example. So the detective walks into the bedroom. He sees a dead body that's been hit with a blunt force instrument. But the detective knows that does not see any blood spatter where there should be blood spatter. In other words, blood spatter is missing and therefore relevant. And the detective knows that the body has probably been dragged into that bedroom where they found it. And so detectives have a keen eye to seeing not only what's there, but also what's not there. Well, the rest of us could be like detectives, we'd be much better at this. Classic famous story here that I'll tell because I still think it's one of the most interesting stories about emission neglect. And it goes back to a tale in World War II where the U.S. Bombers would fly over Germany, drop bombs, and then they would come back and the planes were all shot up with bullets and flak and everything else. And so the Army Air Corps hired an engineer to come and figure out and study the bullet holes to figure out where they should place more armor to protect the airplanes. Okay, so the engineer looked at all the bullet holes and saw that they were shot here and there in the wings and the body and the tail. And then he came back to the client, to the Army Air Corps, and says, you need to put more armor where there aren't any bullet holes. Now, you might be thinking, well, why don't you just armor the whole plane? You can't armor the whole plane because it'd be too heavy and too slow. So they wanted to just patch up those areas that were most susceptible. But do you see what this guy did? What he did is realized the planes that you really need to study are the ones that got shot down. See where those bullet holes are and put armor where those ones got shot down. Don't look at the surviving airplanes. And it's kind of related to another bias called survivorship bias. We tend to only see the things that survive and make it through it. Like, for example, you go down to a popular area here in Cincinnati called OTR, Over the Rhine, and you see all these restaurants and you think, oh my God, this must be a great place for a restaurant. But what are you omitting? You're omitting all the failed restaurants that didn't make it in OTR. You have omission neglect or survivorship bias. You only see the things that survive. And as the old saying goes, the graveyard of failed restaurants is very silent. I love that. So be careful of omission neglect. This is a tough one. Let's go to some questions now. How to let other person know that he or she has overconfidence bias. Yeah, so somebody's suffering from overconfidence and you want to tell them, well, that's not, let me see if I can give you some advice about that. And I think sometimes a good way to do that, and this is not original for me, this is from a very smart economist out there, another economist named Thomas Sowell, who I really admire a lot. Thomas Sowell says, ask these questions. When people make a claim and you think they're being overconfident, say, compared to what? Okay, compared to what? And then you might say something like, what evidence do you have to support that? And at what cost would we incur to achieve that? So, compared to what? What evidence do you have to support it, and what evidence is there to go against it? And then at what would it cost for us to really do this? What's the trade-off here? And that's what happens with overconfident people. They're not looking at the trade-off. So, don't look them in the face and say, "Hey, buddy, you're being overconfident." That's not going to go far, especially if it's a colleague or a boss, right? It doesn't work, and this is true at home as well. So that's what I recommend. Thank you for that question. And here's another one. It says, let's see. So, Drew, I agree with the hazards of the overconfidence bias. In practice, whether corporate America, for medicine, or the broader society, there's a great premium placed on confidence in all things. The confident leaders are promoted, confidence. Can you address this challenge in corporate America? How companies may be more attuned to this risk? This is a very big concern. Companies, and here you want to see how really bad the problem is. Let me tell you that we not only place a premium on confidence in people's answers, but we especially overvalue information that comes from outside of our organization. More than inside of our organization. Information from outside the organization and take that same information from an inside company person, a colleague or whatever. And we have a natural tendency to think the outsider is more right than the insider, even though it's the same information. Why do we discount that? That's a tough one. And it was written up by a very smart lady named Tanya Menon at the University of Chicago at the time. I think she's out of Berkeley now. She wrote a great paper that I still get the creeps when I think about it. It's called Tempting Knowledge, Tainted Knowledge. Check it out. She really describes an insidious problem that I think the corporate environment has, big or small. So thank you for that question. What is the biggest challenge for bias, in your opinion? They all have their soft underbellies, right? And you have to realize you're only human. You have to practice good hygiene, decision-making hygiene. Let's call it that. And it's number one, it's awareness of these issues. Number two, it's being more less trusting of your gut instinct. You can improve your gut. You can improve your instinct. There's some good work out there, but to a point. And trusting your instincts is a lot of times where we start. I'm going to trust my instinct. Well, that's fine, but now build good hygiene, decision-making hygiene habits around that. At probing questions, compared to what, and why am I revising my probabilities? What other evidence do I have that goes against this? And I'll tell you, in the corporate world, if you're seen as a person who is confident to go out and get disconfirming evidence, that, my friends, is a confidence that's going to be rewarded. And all too often, I've seen teams that try hard to keep layering in the strengths of their argument and all the confirming evidence without showing the weaknesses. They're really doing themselves a disservice. I talked about this in a couple of live episodes ago, office hours, about exposing your weaknesses. It's actually a strength, and it boosts the appearance of your authority and your trustworthiness when you do that. Okay, one more question here. Do you have activity suggestions or polling suggestions to allow people to experience these biases on their own? I like that question. It's kind of like a decision-making boot camp, right? How would you go about getting people to spot it? Like, oh my God, I did that. I'm a fan of books, and some very nice books are out there. Dan Ariely, as I mentioned before, has this one called Predictably Irrational. There are other just fantastic books out there as well. The Heath brothers, Chip and Dan Heath, have some very nice books about this. They were also behavioral economists. But in terms of activity or suggestions, what I try to do is get you to realize this, get my students to always realize this. What is the only way you're going to learn in life, really learn something? And learning has 4 steps. And so if you practice this in your daily activities, you're going to give yourself an opportunity to spot and try to defeat these decision-making biases. The 4 steps of all learning are: take an action, look at what actually happened as a result of that action, ask yourself why the difference between what actually happened and what you thought would happen, and then what are you going to do about it next time? Take an action, look at what actually happened, why the difference, what am I going to do about it next time? If you practice that mindset, you will get better and better and better all the time. Reflect on your decisions. Reflect and just say, how could I have improved that? Not just the wins. Don't just look at the wins. Look at the misses. Remember the aircraft. Don't just look at where the bullet holes are. Look at where the bullet holes aren't. And that's what's really going to get you. It's an old adage. I just love this phrase. It's attributed to Will Rogers, but it comes from probably some other source. And the quote goes like this. It's not what you don't know that's going to get you in trouble. It's what you know that ain't so.